Hello and welcome. My name is John Cochrane and I'm an independent risk advisor with IHS Country Risk. I'll be chairing this session this afternoon entitled Prospects for Peace, a Data-Driven Threat Analysis of Syria and Iraq. There will be three speakers. Colin Strack, a senior analyst, MENA in IHS Country Risk, will talk about a settlement for Syria, the prospects. Carl Dewey, a CBRN analyst with Aviation Defence and Security, will brief on the likelihood of continued use of CW in Syria. And finally, Zainab Al-Assam, Senior Principal Analyst in MENA, will brief on the security outlook for Iraq. I would like to highlight that the information used to compile today's presentation has been drawn from a variety of Jane's content, but particularly Conflict Monitor.
So the purpose of today's webinar is, of course, to share with you our latest insights on the conflict in Iraq and Syria. But we also want to show you some of the new data-driven techniques that we've been working on and that are fundamentally changing the way that we do political risk and open source intelligence analysis. The complexity of conflicts like those in Syria and Iraq, with hundreds of actors shifting allegiances and changing objectives, makes it impossible for a human to keep on top of everything that's important. If we want to identify the underlying trends and the indicators that we need to forecast scenarios and their potential impacts, then having a data model of the war that we can query is a tool that we can't really afford not to have. I'm going to start with some of the work we're doing on Syria, looking at the government's military performance and what that means for the ongoing peace talks, and also the new Astana de-escalation plan. What you can see on the screen is a map showing the Syrian government's territorial gains and losses between September 2015, which was the start of Russian intervention on behalf of the government, and May 2017. The dark areas are areas of territory that hasn't changed in that period, controlled by the government. The light green areas are those that the government has recaptured in this time period, and the red areas are territorial losses. Now, overall, we can calculate that's a 23% gain for the government, and it also includes some key strategic priorities. Those are the city of Aleppo and territory to the east of Aleppo, which the government recaptured earlier this year, the objective being to block any further advances by the Turkish-backed forces into Syria. We've then got an area along the Latakia Idlib border, which was key to shoring up the Alawite heartland along the coast. Palmyra as the gateway to Deir ez-Zor, which we will come to a bit later on. And also, very importantly, all these small areas around Damascus where the government has been consolidating its control around the capital. So there have been lots of initiatives over the years by the United Nations in Geneva and Vienna, and more recently by Russia, Iran, and Turkey in Astana. Unfortunately, I think the picture on the left does a pretty good job at capturing the mood. However, it's not all negative. There has been some progress. For example, in Astana, we now have the leaders of the armed groups in the room, as opposed to just the exiled political opposition, which has lost most of its influence. But the bottom line is there's no sign of a settlement, and the conditions on the ground today are just not right for one. So what you see on the screen here is an analysis of the last ceasefire from 29th of December. And what we did is we looked at all of the recorded data on fighting between the Syrian government and rebel forces, and we compared the intensity by province 30 days before and 30 days after the ceasefire arrangement.
15 minutes isn't a particularly long time to discuss the use of chemical weapons in Iraq and Syria. So I've limited my presentation to an analysis of the two main actors. Others have been implicated for the use of chemical weapons, for which I would either advise you to please check out the information in the Jane's archive or ask questions during the Q&A session. Given the use of US military action in Syria in response to sarin, it's interesting to ask what the prospects for continued chemical weapons use are. And I think I posit that the US strikes certainly do have the potential to stop or minimize chemical weapons attacks, simply because the decision to use chemical weapons comes as a consequence of a cost-benefit analysis. In that framework, airstrikes, amongst other things such as sanctions, impose costs. But for this to be done and for this to minimise the impact of chemical weapons, they must be done correctly and consistently. Ironically too, the more the US responds to chemical weapon strikes, the greater susceptibility it is to accusations of false flag attacks or false flag accusations. This is where the Syrian government, for example, claim that an attack does happen, but it's orchestrated by rebels in order to draw in international attention. So in order to look at the claims of increasing refinement and use, here's a snapshot of the Aleppo Campaign late last year. Of all the actors captured by Conflict Monitor, the Syrian government remains the main actor accused of these attacks. And if we look at the individual months, perhaps at the beginning, around 2014, attacks appears in ones and twos primarily. Don't forget these are also distributed across the country, so they would appear to be sporadic, unless around particular clusters as well. And what we see here is the increasing pattern, the increasing confidence, is low numbers and then a peak in attacks. The same data visualized slightly differently. Data allegations over time on the map here really show the main clusters happening around Aleppo, which I've mentioned, around the Latakia heartland, in defense of that, and around Damascus. So one reason for Islamic State's limited capabilities may be an ability to produce or obtain chemical weapons in volume. Several sources for chemical weapons have been hypothesized, and not all can be confirmed or excluded. The most likely include limited production in and around Mosul, as well as obtaining those left over from previous Syrian and Iraqi chemical programs. As the group continues to lose territory, there's a very real risk that individuals will transfer their knowledge and expertise. And a review of online content, online forums by James, suggests that to date there's been very little interest from individuals in the pursuit of chemical or biological weapons. Part of this is normative barriers and the prohibition of poison, but also the inability or the lack of experts really there to enable these threads, these forums, discussions to progress the conversations to answer technical questions.
So Iraqi forces have made considerable progress over the last year in recapturing territory from the Islamic State. And with the operation to liberate the northern Iraqi city of Mosul now in its final stages, all of Iraq's political and armed actors are moving to secure their interests as quickly as possible ahead of the next phase or chapter commonly referred to in Iraq as Iraq ma ba'da Daesh, or Iraq after the Islamic State, not least the powerful Shiite militias in the Popular Mobilization units. The Popular Mobilization units, known in Arabic as the Hashd al-Sha'bi, were made an official arm of the Iraqi state under the PMU law passed last November. They are mostly, although not universally, Shiite, and its leading components are closely aligned with Iran's Revolutionary Guard Quds Force, namely Kata'ib Hezbollah, the Badr Brigades, Sa'ib Ahl al-Haq, Kata'ib Jund al-Imam, Harakat al-Nujaba, to name the most prominent. We've used our data on the PMU across Iraq to pinpoint the locations of most intense activity. To a large extent, these bigger or red-coloured circles reflect the participation of the PMU in areas of active fighting in this time period, i.e. between January 2016 and April 2017. However, it does also show that the PMU have established a presence going from the border with Iran in Diyala province, which is incidentally a stronghold for the Badr Brigade in particular, through Salah ad-Din, Kirkuk and Nineveh towards Syria, as well as establishing a central route towards the Syrian border through Anbar. And elsewhere in central Iraq, attacks have been relatively consistent. And in fact, those areas have always seen a relatively high level of IEDs or insurgency even before the Islamic State took territory there.
Before we go into the Q&A, I just want to remind you that the slides from today's briefing are available to everyone to save as a PDF when you leave this session. Time has caught up with us, and that concludes the seminar. Thank you for joining us today for this event.